You're standing at the door of a church in Pécs. It's cold outside, fog clinging to the stone. Behind you, thousands of families wait for your word. Women with children on their backs, priests carrying icons instead of weapons. Ahead of you, the Ottoman army returning to punish anyone who sided with the Habsburgs. Patriarch Arsenije III Čarnojević has one night to decide whether to lead his people into the unknown. The Ottoman Empire of 1690 is not the empire Serbs knew for generations. It had been retreating, losing territory, but now it's coming back, vengeful. The Habsburg army that liberated Kosovo and part of Serbia in 1688 is pulling back toward the Danube. Behind it, villages that rose up against the Turks that welcomed the Austrians as liberators. For them, the return of the Ottomans doesn't just mean defeat, it means retribution. They have no army, no state, just a column, women, children, priests, livestock, carts loaded with everything that could be carried, and one man at the front. Arsenije III Čarnojević, Patriarch of Pécs, makes a decision that will redraw the map of southeastern Europe. He will lead his people north, across the Sava and the Danube, into the land of an emperor who never promised them anything, only a chance to survive. The journey takes weeks. Winter catches them on the road. By the end of this video, you'll see how that flight became the foundation of a military system that guarded an empire's border for 300 years. This wasn't the first wave. The Habsburgs had been building this border against the Ottomans much earlier. After the defeat at Mohacs in 1526, when Hungarian defenses collapsed, Vienna placed the first border guards under military command as early as 1522 and 1527. Ferdinand I issued a charter in 1538 offering land to refugees from Ottoman territory, Vlachs and Serbs, in exchange for military service. In that charter, their leaders were officially called Serbian captains and voivodes for the first time. Vienna recognized them as a military force, not as refugees. The offer repeated and hardened over the decades. In 1608, Emperor Rudolf II issued a new decree on Vlach rights. In 1627, Ferdinand II expanded it, and in 1630, the same emperor consolidated it all into the Statuta Valachorum, the Vlach Statute, which finally turned the offer into law. The right to their own kneses and judges, exemption from feudal obligations to the Croatian nobility, placed directly under Vienna's authority, beyond the reach of the Croatian Sabor. By 1690, that border already existed, divided into the Croatian and Slavonian military frontiers, tested through a century of practice. Čarnojević wasn't leading his people into a void. He was leading them into a system that had been waiting decades for people exactly like them. What the border guards received wasn't charity. It was a contract. Land they farmed, theirs, hereditary, beyond the reach of a feudal lord, worked collectively through the Zadruga, the extended family unit that shared land and obligation. Freedom of religion, the Orthodox Church, untouched inside a Catholic empire. Self-governance, their own kneses deciding justice, not Croatian nobility. The price? Every man capable of bearing arms, for life, at the emperor's call. This wasn't a mercenary army. It was an army of farmers defending their own land, not someone else's. And in 1690, Emperor Leopold I expanded that offer. The Illyrian privileges guaranteed Serbs settling in Vojvodina and along the border religious and national autonomy, independent of the Catholic hierarchy. 30,000 to 40,000 families, perhaps 200,000 people, accepted the offer and crossed into the Habsburg Monarchy. The system worked. The border was divided into generalates: Varaždin, Karlovac, the Banal frontier, the Slavonian frontier, later the Banat frontier too. Every village, every family folded into a military formation before a war ever broke out. A chain of towers and watchposts stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Smoke signals or fire carried word of a raid faster than a rider on horseback. In 1579, Archduke Charles II built Karlovac, a fortress shaped like a six-pointed star, constructed purely as the border's military headquarters. A town that exists, from its very first stone, only because the border exists. When the Ottomans attacked, there was no army to mobilize from the rear. The border was already defending itself, because the border was the army and the village at the same time. For generations, the border guards held a line that a regular European army couldn't have sustained, forts and palisades through forest and swamp against one of the strongest military powers of the age. By the end of the 17th century, the military frontier was known across Europe as a model of effective border defense, effective enough that other powers later studied and copied it. These weren't refugees waiting to be saved. This was a community built around a single purpose, that the line would never fall. And it didn't. 150 years after 1690, the military frontier still stood, still defending the same line. But the contract they signed with the emperor was never secure. The Croatian nobility never accepted that someone else's peasants, beyond their authority, sat on the best land in Slavonia and Croatia. For decades, the Sabor in Zagreb tried to pull the border guards back under feudal jurisdiction, to turn them into serfs like everyone else. Every time Vienna needed peace with the Croatian nobility, the border guards' privileges became a bargaining chip. The Statuta Valachorum was amended, reinterpreted, violated, reaffirmed, the same cycle that began in 1608, repeating generations later. The border guards fought back, not with weapons against the emperor, but with petitions, refusals of service, sometimes open resistance against local officers who broke the deal. What had been promised as a permanent right had to be defended again in every generation, not from the Ottomans, but from their own allies. The irony is brutal. The people who survived Ottoman retribution crossed a river into the unknown and built a defense system that saved the Habsburg Monarchy. That same people spent their whole lives defending a contract from the men who signed it. This isn't a story of clean freedom. That would be a lie. This is a story of a community that survived by turning displacement into identity. They weren't nobility. They weren't serfs. They were something feudal Europe had no word for. People whose right to land was conditioned on the blood they were willing to spill for a border. That position, in between, neither above nor below on the feudal ladder, became the foundation of an identity that outlived both the Ottoman Empire and the very reason it existed. Migrations like the one in 1690 permanently changed the ethnic and religious map of Croatia and Slavonia. An Orthodox population, until then rare in these lands, became a permanent and substantial part of the border. When the military frontier was finally abolished in 1881 and absorbed into civilian Croatia and Slavonia, the border they had defended for 350 years stopped physically existing. But the people who defended it, the Krajišnici, didn't disappear with it. They remained what the border had made them, a community defined not by noble blood, but by generations of service and resistance. One question remains that this story doesn't answer. What happens to a people whose entire identity was built around defending a border once that border disappears? Once the emperor no longer needs their guns? Once the land they defended for 3.5 centuries becomes just ordinary land, stripped of the purpose that defined it? That question won't stay unanswered for long. The 19th century that follows 1881 will bring the same people a new question. Not who defends the border, but who decides where the border runs at all, and whose land it is once the military purpose is gone. That's a story that deserves its own video.